Welcome to our LPC meeting. We have, I think, 60 potential people online, and 64. Thank you for joining us. It's my first time leading the LPC meeting, so I'm going to do a little bit of a twist. When you come here as maybe a new elected official or a new city planner, you come in here and you're nervous, and the league is a fantastic organization, but they talk about a lot of high-level stuff. And so I just want to start by saying if they talk about things that you don't understand, that's normal. It takes a minute to get your legs under you and to kind of figure it out. I also thought it might be fun to do like with the leadership, and I haven't even asked Mayor Silverstreeny, and the rest of the leadership, I think we'll do like a 1-minute fun fact about us, because just to lighten it a little bit. And so today, I think my fun fact, and we'll have Mayor Silverstreeny step up and give his, what's your favorite food? If I could eat anything, and I have a huge family of good eaters, like yesterday I did 2 roasts, 4 chickens, salmon. This is just Sunday dinner, right? But if I could eat anything, it would just be a good burger. I love a good burger. So, Mayor Silverstreeny, come tell us what your favorite food is.
So, my favorite food is chili verde. The red iguana is the gold standard in that for me. But whenever I go out to eat, and I always try that, and my wife does a pretty good job of making it from scratch. So.
I love it. And I don't see Dawn here. Has she come yet? All right, well, don't worry, we'll get her next time. So let's get started. We have a full agenda. So our first item of business is the minutes. So I need a motion for the minutes. All right, we have a motion to approve the minutes. I need a second. We have a second. It's open for discussion. Does anybody have anything that they saw that they didn't like or want changed? All right, let's go ahead and call it to a vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Perfect, motion carries. Let's go ahead and turn the time over to Justin. Now, Justin, the goal is really, do we get done early, right?
Yeah.
That's what I tell my city.
All right, we'll be quick. Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, I appreciate you like chili verde. My wife has a habit of ordering mole when we go eat Mexican, and she always remembers about a bite in that she doesn't like it. And so whatever I ordered is what she's eating, because I get to switch. And I do like it, so it's fine.
Now, if you have a golf course in your municipality, I saw a few eyebrows poke up right there. Yes, Kate, that was you, and some others. But if you have a golf course in your municipality, the Natural Resources Committee is going to be looking at water use on golf courses. So if you have a golf course, be prepared. You're going to get some legislative researchers reaching out to you about water use on golf courses. Also, the Division of Water Resources is going to be probably reaching out at some point, looking at different ordinances, talking about where people are at with their ordinances and water use. So several things. Some of them are coming from other sources. You should respond to those. The ones coming from us, you should definitely respond to those. Slightly different emphasis there, because we need that data. If we don't have that data, then we can't defend as well. And then I'm just going to jump forward to several slides really quick, and then we'll run back. Mentioned this a little bit already at several of our meetings, annual and some others, but I want to talk about the TIF audit. There it is. There's our slide. The TIF audit that came out last legislative interim day. We mentioned this at LPC a month ago, but there was 10 cities who were involved with an audit when it came to TIF. Any of the cities here that were involved with the audit, if you really want to speak about it, if you want to get up and say anything about it, I'll give you a minute if you want to say anything. But really what happened is the Legislative Auditor's Office was tasked with finding out whether or not TIF has been effective. When they went to do this audit of whether or not TIF was effective, they found out there were some inconsistencies with how things were being tracked, with how some analyses were being done as to whether or not it was effective or not. And so their recommendations came back really looking for some consistency in the way these are tracked. So the Legislative Auditor's Office presented this last time at interim. I had the opportunity to respond to it in 3 different committees, because that's how the legislative process works sometimes, as you get to do three presentations the same in 24 hours. But they had some recommendations when it came to TIF. And I'll read those really quick here. You can see them on the slide. We recommend that the legislature consider revising the statute to include guidance on managing unexpended TIF funds once a collection period ends, to require local governments to make financial information such as receipts, expenditures, account balances, and fund transfer publicly available for each project area, and to require local government to conduct a robust justification study known as a but-for analysis that adequately justifies the use of TIF funds. So Representative Dunnigan is going to be running a bill that addresses these issues, and we want to make sure that we're at the table discussing what that looks like. So if you were involved in the TIF audit, if you have RDAs, if you're interested in this discussion, please let me know, because we will be talking with Representative Dunnigan and working through that. So reach out to me, my email, jlee@ulct.org. Let me know, and happy to have you be involved with those discussions. With those announcements, I think, Cam, we'll kick it back over to you to talk about everybody's favorite subject, housing in the UUOC. And maybe some better news before that.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us a few minutes earlier than normal today. We have 69 online in addition to the people in the room. The league officers, Justin, I have to leave at 1, though the dialogue at LPC can continue after we go, but we're meeting with the Desert News KSL editorial board at 1:30 to talk about, you guessed it, housing, growth, and related issues. Before, though, we get into that stuff, a reminder about the UEOC Commission. We mentioned this at annual last or 2 weeks ago now, as well as with the City Managers Association and the League Board. But where we're at in the UEOC timeframe is the full UEOC will next meet on November 22nd. That actually may get moved up a week. We're still waiting on the exact final timing there, which means we're in that window between now and mid-November to finalize not just our opposition to the ideas that have come forward from the Property Rights Coalition, but also to proactively put forward concepts that would result in good policy. Speaking of good outcomes, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to point out the historic nature of last Saturday's game. And yes, even at my age, I felt obligated to storm the field. I stand by that decision 2 days later, and I'm just glad my voice has recovered and that my wife was able to come to the game too. But it was, right, Mayor Kafusi, was about as electric an atmosphere as you're ever going to find in college football. It was awesome. And it was a nice distraction from UEOC stuff. Okay, back to UEOC. This was actually the slide we presented back at LPC last month. So you see we're just walking down the list and crossing off dates. November 8th is when the CHA next meets. So this is really the last chance for LPC and the league members generally to give policy direction as we're working on a counter proposal. Now, the question that came up repeatedly at annual is, what are state leaders actually trying to achieve? In fact, at UCMA, at City Managers Association during the conference, several city managers said, we don't even know what the target is that we're trying to achieve here. It feels like the goalposts keep moving. And it's not because we tore them down. It was because, in many ways, the goalposts have moved over the last couple of years on this issue. The summary is that there's still, despite our best efforts, a perception from state leaders that local governments are stopping housing supply. That housing supply would be bigger but for local government, particularly for first-time home buyers with smaller lots, townhomes, and the like. So here are just a handful of quotes from folks, several of whom you heard from at the league conference a couple of weeks ago. This is where I'll point out, oh, actually, Carson, that number's now bumped up, right, from 75 to 78. So House Bill 462, the deadline was October 1st for compliance. As of this morning, it's now 78 of the 82 cities have submitted their reports. Now, the submission does not necessarily mean compliance, but you can't comply unless you submit. So that's a key first step. And DWS will be reviewing those reports over the next few weeks. DWS is also working on their methodology. We asked them for an update, and as of the end of last week, they're still trying to figure out how to comply with that language in House Bill 462 of what the, quote, methodology for determining whether local government is taking sufficient measures to protect and promote moderate income housing should be. And so stay tuned on that piece, but they are required by December 1st to have at least a framework for what that methodology should look like. Now, Justin gave you the pitch a second ago on data. Carson, I'll invite you up just to remind people what survey we have in the field with league members right now. But this is actually from the Gardner Policy Institute. So this is on top of what we're already seeking. The gap has shrunk of housing units between 2018 and now. In the report that just came out this month, that we are taking to the editorial boards this afternoon, single-family units as a percentage of the overall permitted units is at its lowest amount on record. So only 43% of housing units permitted in the second quarter in 2022 were single-family, which is the lowest percentage on record. And townhomes, conversely, are the highest on record. So the most permits for townhomes in the second quarter that we've ever seen in the history of the state of Utah. Now, that's just based on permits. Carson will give just the 90-second pitch on the survey that we have in the field right now that we pitched to the City Managers Association during the conference, and for which we need data back by the end of this week. Yes, it feels like the session. Carson.
Thanks, Cam. I won't start off by asking how many people like filling out surveys, because I think I know the answer to that. But it's really critical, and I know we ask for a lot, especially this most recent survey. We've mentioned this to several city managers. We'll be reaching out to additional city managers. If you have a city manager, they're probably going to be hearing from us if they haven't already. We're going to be asking about entitled lots, residential and commercial processing time at a high level, and then the size of residential lots. And I know I've already had several conversations with you about the difficulty in obtaining this information and getting the queries right. And I know that you're all scrambling to get this together, so I appreciate those of you who've already filled it out. We'll keep, yes, Mayor.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
I was actually calling you to talk about the Neil meetings.
yeah. So I just want to add this. I want to interrupt Carson just to stress the importance of our cooperation in filling out this survey data. I mean, we had a meeting with Neil Abercrombie, who's the governor's legislative guy. This last week, we touched on some of these ideas about how much housing has been entitled by cities and maybe even hasn't been built yet, and what we're doing. And if we want to, basically what Neil said is, give me more of that data, give me more of that, because that's what I can use to talk to the governor. And I think that it's also what we can use to talk to leadership in the legislature to try to change this narrative a little bit, that we're not the anchor that's holding this thing up, but the data speaks, and the only way we can get this data at this point is if all of our communities cooperate by responding to these surveys on time.
And like I said, we'll be reaching out to, if you haven't heard from us by probably the end of the day, please feel free to reach out to me and I'll get you a link. If you have data that's similar, but you don't have this exact information, then I'm happy to work with you to try to figure out how we can merge the two data sets or select the right fields. But this is really, really critical in painting the correct picture. Again, the permits only paint a part of the picture, a big part of the picture, but we need to really be able to demonstrate beyond any possible doubt that local governments are using the tools at their disposal to enable more housing and to plan for growth appropriately. It's a hard argument to make. The anecdotes are easily the opposing side's anecdotes are really easy to generate, really hard to disprove, but we have to just keep at it. Otherwise, there's no way that we're going to be able to change policymakers' minds. So feel free to reach out to me with questions, and I'll keep bothering city managers and community development directors. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Carson. And part of the reason I preface this with the calendar is November 8th is when the CHA will next vote. And right now what they have in front of them are measures that this group and the league board have opposed, but that's why we're trying to fill in the gaps on the data piece and then steer the conversation around these framing questions. Will policy proposals result in good planning for growth? Will they result in more housing units that are actually affordable to the buyer or renter? That gets to that overall concept that we keep hearing from state leaders, if we need more housing units for first-time home buyers and the like. And then do the proposals respect the traditional land use planning role of local governments? So we're trying to navigate this whole piece into that sandbox. Speaking of sandboxes, so this is what we actually presented to the league board in September. We're not going to go through it in detail, but it's more just for information purposes. The areas where there's potential consensus and areas where there's no consensus, color-coded from the LPC survey results. So thank you for filling that survey out in August, because we presented those in depth to the board to be able to say, we don't see any room for negotiation on these pieces because our members were adamantly opposed, but we do see a potential path in these areas where our members came back and said they could live with these concepts. That in turn led us to building what we've referred to as the framework for our counter proposal. And the topics on the left, the proposal in the middle, and then what those potential results would be on the right. Again, consistent with the survey results is the survey results that you gave us in August. Anything that's listed in green was a strongly comfortable, or no, what's the exact term? Very comfortable. Very comfortable, and gold was somewhat comfortable. So those were areas that you told us it made sense to pursue, and so that's what we've been looking at. What we're going to talk about here for the next few minutes is this item number 3, which we prefaced at the last LPC meeting 3 weeks ago, or 4 weeks ago now, and had really tremendous discussion about at annual a week and a half ago in caucus meetings, UCMA, and at the board level. The board endorsed what you see on this screen as the framework, and then instructed staff to get to work putting words on paper to implement some of these concepts. So that's what we've done. For those of you in the room, when you walked in, there were a couple of sheets of paper that you hopefully picked up. Sheet number 1, league staff proposal for administrative land use decisions revisions. So if you missed it on the way in, please go back and grab it. For those of you online, Carson will be sharing the screen in just a moment to pull this document up. And I'm going to turn it over in a moment to Todd Godfrey, who is our land use counsel, to discuss what we've laid out here in the context of administrative land use decisions for subdivisions. After we talk about this piece, the other document that's in the back of the room and that we will circulate online is today's poll questions. We did this in September. It was incredibly useful for us as staff to get the live feedback from you. Rather than asking for hands in the room, we did it junior high style as a worksheet. This also gives you a chance, because we had several people say, I raised my hand, but I really wanted to provide context. Fair enough. Now you can. For those online, same thing. You'll have the questions pop up in the chat, and then you can contact Carson directly with your additional context as we ask for questions, because this is where, as we have been working on potential drafts, we recognize, that we don't really have survey results on point. So we wanted to get feedback from you, because this Thursday we're meeting with the Land Use Task Force, and the Property Rights Coalition is awaiting our counter proposal. And these were the 3 pieces that we felt like needed additional dialogue. So make sure in person you have this subdivisions piece. I'm going to give everyone a chance just to read through it and digest it for a second. And then online, Carson, I'll let you switch it over to pull it up on the screen so people online can look at it. We did not circulate it in advance because frankly, we were still working on it as of 2 hours ago. So take a minute in the room and look at it. Have you switched over?
I can do it in Justin's screen share.
How about you do it?
And if you still need the poll questions, raise your hand and I can bring it over to you.
Yep.
There you go. So we're seeing that.
Yeah, perfect.
So well, I guess I was going to do this while they were doing that, but apparently it's done. So I just want to kind of add something to what Cameron's going to talk about. But in both LPC and the league board meeting, we've had discussions about that thing that was on the screen just a minute ago about like the things that we were like red, yellow, or green about, and the other thing that we've been hearing, as most of us know, when we're up on the Hill lobbying, we hear frequently, that league says no to everything. And so, these proposals that we have the opportunity to present really are an opportunity for the league to be kind of bold and proposing something that we can actually agree upon. And at the convention, at the communities of interest caucuses, there was discussion in each of those caucuses about some of the things that we might be able to make a proposal on. And one of those is the administrative review of subdivisions. And what we've learned about this is that our jurisdictions do things very differently across the board, and that's frustrating to the development community and the Property Rights Coalition. When we had just some preliminary discussions about this with Neil, and also I've had a chance to talk to the speaker about this in terms of like what could be bold, what might work. And I said, what if we came to you with some ideas about how to streamline the administrative process on some certain things? So, because we hear all the time, we want to insulate you from public clamor. Well, we've been pushing back on that, and we don't want to eliminate the public clamor, or public input, we should say. But there are maybe some things that we can do in that administrative arena that maybe simplify things that could be viewed to be the bold initiative that the governor and the speaker and everybody is telling us. Say they want to see some radical improvement. This could be the vehicle, and it's a vehicle that I think that most of us can live with based upon the input that we've received either here, talking about this on the board, or at the convention. So that's one of the things we're going to talk about. The other bold initiative that we can make that I think we'll have broad agreement on is to do more things related to water, and specifically, at least for new things, probably like getting rid of the requirement to have non-functional turf. So those are the two kind of things that we're thinking about that might be bold proposals that would actually give the league the opportunity to be saying yes to something and advocating for something. And it might actually be enough to shift the focus away from some of the worst things that are being talked about in terms of tying our road funds and things like that to certain things, or shot clocks or whatever. So that's kind of what our thinking on this is, and I'll let you talk about the details.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor. I'll turn it over to Todd to walk you through the document. Now you've had a chance to review it. If you have comments, now's your time. Speak up. Let us know what you like. Let us know what causes concerns. Carson will be monitoring the chat room. We'll be monitoring in person. And then Todd will get a hard copy for you right there. And then once we're done with this piece, we will have 2 questions of the 3 poll questions that are related to subdivisions. Okay, so we'll come back to those in a second. Todd.
I want to be quick, respect everybody's time. Mayor Silvestrini really covered, I think, the impetus of this the best way he could. When I started land use practice in the late 90s, early 2000s, it wasn't unusual for me to see cities with 3-step subdivision processes, but that required concept plan approval from a planning commission and a council, preliminary plat approval from a planning commission and a council, and final plat approval from a planning commission and a council. In high growth cities where there are a number of applications on every agenda for both planning commissions and councils, I could see subdivisions, 10 lot, 12 lot, 20 lot subdivisions take a year to get approved. We've improved that significantly, but I still think there's some room for further improvement. And what we're proposing to do is to provide a relatively uniform subdivision process on a state level. It would be 3-step, with the emphasis on making sure that your final decisions are being made by administrative bodies. I don't necessarily want to define that at its finest level now. There's some things we have to do. We have such drastic differences between our towns, our small cities, our big cities, but we are trying to talk about, I guess I would call it a streamlined, and I don't necessarily want to say condensed, but for some of you, potentially condensed subdivision process, where we talk about concept, a preliminary plat, and a final plat. And we start to limit the land use authority who hears those particular kinds of approvals. I do think that has happened in a number of our cities. I don't think that's as uniform as it could be. So that's what this proposal sort of details. The state statute several years ago removed the requirement for a public hearing on subdivisions. We know that's a sensitive point for a ton of our members. And so what we're proposing is providing an option in this administrative process where cities or towns that wanted to could still have traditional public hearings on subdivisions. But if you chose, and if it matches what your city does, feels, needs, you could receive your public comment in a different way. You could do it in a written format at the time period prior to a planning commission's consideration of a concept plan. That public input then gets reviewed by the planning commission and the applicant, formulated into the preliminary plat. That gets heard by the planning commission, and then the final plat just kind of gets handled at an administrative level. So that's the general proposal we're talking about for subdivisions. We anticipate, as we start to talk about administrative land use processes, that this will move over into your site plan reviews for commercial projects or potentially multifamily housing projects, right? Where you don't necessarily need subdivisions, but you do site review. We anticipate it bleeding into conditional use reviews. So that's the proposal that we're ready to push forward, that we've received generally broad concurrence from the league members about. There were really robust conversations about this 2 weeks ago at your annual convention, and this is kind of the outgrowth of those. Are there any questions we can take? And again, understand, this is a general framework. We haven't started doing statutory revision yet, but this is sort of what we're talking about. Carson.
We have a question online from Paul Larson. Would there be time to get ordinances into shape before this process initiated, or would it just?
I think we have to do that, right? We've always done that with significant land use revisions, and we haven't necessarily tackled that question yet, but there has to be some period of time. Great.
I want the awkward silence to last a while. Oh, good. Here's. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Todd, could you repeat the questions?
The question for Paul Larson from Brigham was, would there be a time period after adoption for implementation so that we could alter our ordinances? And we haven't specifically discussed that, but I think there has to be some time period like that. There always has been with significant changes in our land use laws.
And I have a comment from Seth Perrins. In Spanish Fork, we follow these three processes very closely. However, our concept plan stage is very high level. Pre-application, it is intended to allow the would-be applicant the opportunity to have the concept reviewed at the high level before they invest a lot of money in engineering, et cetera. Would this new concept plan be considered vested or as an application?
I don't know that I want to necessarily wade into that too deep right now. What I will give you is my personal view. I don't know what vesting at concept plan has ever meant in this state. Other than this, generally somebody brings a concept plan and it has a number of lots. Sometimes we want to talk about whether or not that means vested. I've never considered anything necessarily being vested until somebody records a final plat. So Seth, if you want to call and talk to me about that, we can dive a little deeper into it. I don't know what vesting means at any preliminary stage, to be honest with you. I've never understood that concept. So.
Could you spend just a little bit more time talking about, I know Seth touched on this, but what staff's thinking with regards to a concept plan and how that differs from a preliminary approval? Just in reading the explanation, the shot clock, or not shot clock, the trigger doesn't start for us until we have a completed application, which starts in our case at downpull the preliminary plat stage.
So does your ordinance have some kind of a sketch plan or a concept plan review written into it?
No.
Okay. And some cities do, some cities don't, Gary. And what I want is an opportunity for an applicant and the city to sit down and talk about the broader parameters of a subdivision, the number of lots, where the access would come from, those kind of questions. To be honest with you, I think preliminary generally starts to dial down more on specific road locations, streetscape standards. It confirms the number of lots, in my opinion. And then final gets to the detailed engineering drawings, right? Where you present a final plat. That's the way I see the 3 stages. There's always been room in this state, and people have treated it differently. And sketch plan and concept plan all have kind of meant the same thing. Some cities have it codified, some cities don't. I'd like to provide a uniform state standard, I think, that would provide, I guess, what I would call some predictability for cities and towns and for applicants for land use approvals. At some point, I think in Cam's poll questions, we'll get to this in a minute, but at some point, I think it's helpful both to cities and towns and to developers to know how long this process might take. I think that answering that question might go a long way to helping both the public and our land use applicants and the city better manage the projects we get brought in front of us. And so those are all sort of broad goals. If that answers your question about what concept means, I think that's kind of the way we'll be defining. Concept is really broad. Preliminary is a little bit more dialed down, and final is the detailed engineering and everything else that goes on an actual plat.
So just follow-up question and then, or comment, and then one last question on this, if I may. An area where I see some concern is the amount of time that the concept plan stage takes. Right now, this came up in our city manager meeting, and the conference was, you may talk for 10 months with the developer as plans come back in, and there's a question of when fees are paid. Fees typically aren't paid until there's an actual application submitted. In a recent public hearing, we had a developer claim that we had the application for 8 months without taking action, when in reality they'd only submitted an application 2 months previous. For 6 months, we've gone back and forth in this concept plan, and so I worry about that a little bit. I think that's something we'll have to work through. And then just my final question is, can you just confirm, Ben, that as far as this is concerned, the idea would be concept plan would be reviewed by the planning commission with some public input as you have, and then preliminary plat approved by the planning commission, final plat approved by staff?
Yeah, and I'm not wanting this to be so detailed that it would require a preliminary plat to necessarily be approved by a planning commission either. Cities could have the option to do that differently, I think. I saw a question from Mark Christensen online, which I think is a really excellent one. What would this do to custom zoning kind of proposals? And the answer to that, Mark, I don't have that fully developed in my head yet, but our custom zoning sort of, I guess you would call them planned development projects, in my mind, tend to have a very heavy legislative edge to them. At least the courts have told us they do. And so I think we are going to try to find a way to sort of push those out of this simple processing paradigm. I think we have to, and I think the development community will definitely want that. I don't think they'll want to necessarily be restricted by this process for those kinds of projects. At least that's my anticipation right now.
Todd, can you also, coming back to Gary's question, just reference the role of public input in this process? And I know it's on the sheet, but that was a key component of the conversation at annual a couple weeks ago. So talk through the first crack at it here. And I should also point out too that there were a couple of cities who we kind of test drove this with over the last couple of days, and their feedback is not yet incorporated into this document because we got it this morning. So this is very much a living, breathing document to keep the dialogue going. But can you hit on the public input piece?
Yeah, so part of the concern we hear often is two sides of this battle, I guess. One is the public comment derails good projects, and the other is the public comment is absolutely essential to good projects. And so what we've tried to do is allow cities to craft the receipt of that comment the way they want. So you'll see, you can have the traditional public hearing if you want to, or you could receive the written public comment ahead of time. I like it at the concept plan stage because it keeps it focused on where I think that input is most meaningful. I don't really want my public telling me necessarily what the exact streetscape should look like, or what the size of the storm drain pipe should be, or, and so we're trying to focus that at the earliest stage. The number of lots, the general location for access, the broadest street parameters, those kind of things. And so that's the way I see that sort of working out in a revised statute. Oh, don't give Gary the mic. Oh, shoot.
Well, I just wanted to follow up on, when we actually did some of the design standards and made some of the changes there, we recognized that there would be exceptions, and those exceptions were extremely important for PRUDs, for contractual contracts, development contracts that were developed in special situations. In Layton, we have sensitive lands, areas that need special attention. And I think to the extent we're just talking about is what subdivisions come through on a day-to-day basis, I think this is reality, but it gets less that way as we look at the different things that we challenge with different types of projects we challenge with, like Mark said, the different types of PRD decisions that we end up in making. We just need to make sure that we allow ourselves the flexibility to be able to deal with some of the things that the developers consider to be of very, very high value to them. That is the TRDPs we put together. Sometimes we do things that we would never do in just a regular subdivision, and it takes time to put those things together. So we need to make sure that the exclusions are there.
Gary's comment, for those who may not have been able to hear, is that we need to make sure in this proposal that we provide for the special development or plan development kind of issues that come up, similar to what Mark Christensen raised.
Tom, my comment is on the concept plan stage. It says a concept plan stage will include a public comment. My request would be that it say may include a public comment or a public hearing. Again, preserving the options. Our organization's worked for years to try and clearly separate these administrative and legislative functions. And for the organizations that choose to say, no, we want to hold to strictly an administrative process, they may choose to say, we don't want public comment on these administrative things. I think it still preserves the option for those that want them and feel like there's value there. But I don't want organizations to feel compelled by a state statute that they have to provide a public input process on administrative decisions. So my recommendation would be that that will becomes may.
You have lots of supporters on that comment. There are also a few detractors. So we understand exactly what you're saying.
I just wondered if we, in the concept plan stage, if we ought to include, or that is not exclude, a city council from acting on that concept. So, because some of these things, even though this may be an administrative process, things like access, number of lots might have some discretion that the city council may want to weigh in on. So I don't know if that's off the table already, or what you think about allowing a city council to weigh in on the concept.
That was discussed pretty heavily a couple of weeks ago at the convention with all the different groups, and the input wasn't necessarily uniform. It was interesting, in our large growth cities, there was a fairly strong feeling about leaving the councils involved. In every other group, the support was pretty uniform to take them out. So this proposal right now does not have a council involved in that process.
I just want to add a couple of things related to what Gary talked about a few minutes ago. It's Gary up here. I think with the subdivision, with the concept plan, it's important that we define a little bit more what needs to be included in that. I would hate to get to the point where concept plan submitted, you have public comment on it, and then things get bogged down, as Gary talked about, and then the developers come back and say, we had the concept plan and we provided everything that was required. I think we need to be more specific, almost as much as what we would require for preliminary plat, since it's going to public comment. I think that probably needs to be defined so there's no ambiguity between what staff is looking at with the developer on what's required to be submitted in that concept plan.
Can I ask a question related to that then? Should we just be doing a two-step process? Should we be eliminating the concept plan? And Cam, I know you hate this because we're working on the fly here, but should we be eliminating the concept plan and just doing a preliminary and a final? I anticipate if we did that, most cities and towns would craft an ordinance that would encourage the development community to come in and speak with them before they file an application for preliminary plat. And then you would get the public comment at the preliminary stage as opposed to the concept.
We have two questions online. The first is from Mark. So there we go. First is from Mark Christensen. Concept plans often can't be built in a real world environment. Does this allow us large ability to resolve built environments for technical issues as the process proceeds without shutting doors on quality design and construction?
It's intended to, and I understand where the concern is there, Mark.
Great. And then the second question is from David Johnson. This issue is largely driven by developer frustration of fast-growing and large cities. Rural communities with populations of less than 10,000 and less than 5,000 residents make up approximately 80% of communities in Utah. How is this proposal considering the impacts to small cities and towns to follow an even more state-mandated and legislated process with much more limited staff and resources than our larger, fast-growing peers?
Yeah, tell them to hang on for the poll questions because we're going to get to some of that.
We have a couple more. This one's a comment. North Ogden utilizes a technical review committee meeting for subdivisions similar to a concept plan. However, it is a staff and developer process to flesh out the issues prior to the planning commission viewing the preliminary plan. And Paul Larson said he'd be very opposed to eliminating concept plan. Let's make changes to the other end of the pipe. The concept plan is important to get the city and developer on the same page regarding design and layout. Scott has said he would rather have two-step than three. And then yeah, so we'll keep comments in.
Great. Anything else from the room? Thanks for your input and your feedback. It really does help us.
Okay, the inevitable question here then is, well, what are the next steps? As I mentioned at the league board meeting a week and a half ago, the league board endorsed a motion that directed us as staff to start putting words on paper around streamlining public input and potentially defining how some of these administrative land use functions could work, which is why we started with subdivisions. We started with subdivisions because of the nexus with housing. There are, Angela, I almost hate bringing up conditional use permits with Salt Lake City right now, but you guys made the paper about conditional uses, which is not always the case. You know, that particular incident is not about housing. Subdivisions, most of your subdivision issues do come back to housing, so that's why we started here. I've been taking notes furiously. Carson's tracking all the notes in the chat room, but we as staff felt like this concept before you is consistent with the motion that the board passed. So there's nothing for you to vote on yet today. It was to give us this feedback so that we can modify this and get it ready to take to the Property Rights Coalition later this week. So with that being said, before we get to the poll questions, are there any other final questions or comments that people want to bring up in the meeting right now, either in person or online? Councilmember Shelton.
I think if we're talking strictly administrative action in our city, and of course I don't know how it works anywhere else. I only know it's not Jordan. In our city, I think that, you know, we hold public hearings on an administrative item. The developer has checked all the boxes. The plan is ultimately approved by the planning commission.
And the public goes away frustrated that their public comment couldn't impact the decision because the developer was in compliance, the planning commission had to approve. And so I've wondered if there really is value in public hearing on a strictly administrative item. And I just kind of put that out there as something that's rattling around in my head a little bit.
Thank you, council member. And that really was the sentiment in the big city caucus a week and a half ago, right? Is there was a lot of back and forth. And that was the caucus that I attended with staff and in other caucus member meetings. Councilmember Sheldon from South Jordan basically said that when South Jordan holds its hearings on administrative items and the public provides comments and they're frustrated by the project, but the project checks all the boxes, the planning commission approves it and the public walks away frustrated that their voice didn't matter. So really then how do you reconcile those pieces? Should you even have is there value at all in holding the hearing for the administrative item and having public input? So I think you've summarized nicely the exact dilemma we've been trying to solve. And coming back to the framework, what we got this question a lot during the conference of like, what does this proposal have to do with housing, right? So state leaders are focused on housing. What does this proposal have to do with it? Well, the two biggest attack points that we hear from state leaders have been around local processes and around local zoning and density therein. Well, this does get to the process piece. And if we can improve how we operate our administrative processes, that addresses one of the big beefs that we hear frequently from legislators. And public input is a part of that process. It's a valuable part of the process. But right now, are we setting cities up to fail and the public up to fail because of how the process is operating? And is there a way to avoid some of those conflicts that you just described, council member, by rerouting public input to earlier in the process and getting some predictability for property owner and frankly for city as well? So my key takeaways are on multiple sheets of paper here, so I'm not going to try to summarize them just yet. But what we will be doing over the next 24 hours is taking the feedback we've received in this meeting and any additional feedback that may come to you this afternoon that you want to drop to us, and then we will be updating this document so that we are prepared to meet with the Property Rights Coalition later this week and focus on these potential improvements to how the land use process operates. Carson, Mayor Phippen has an interesting point. When developers are prepared, the process is already streamlined. It's when they cut corners it bogs down. And that's a great point. And I'm just quickly scanning. Oh, it looks like, Carson, you got all these before. Okay, so let's get to poll questions, because as we've been deliberating as staff over the last few days since the board gave us the direction, we had a bunch of frankly unanswered questions, and we've tried to summarize them into some poll questions so that you can help us. The first poll question gets to something that Todd referenced in his comments, which is around timing. And that is part of the frustration we hear from the development community is things just take too long at City Hall. In fact, when Mayor Petro hosted Speaker Wilson and almost every mayor in Davis County at her home, it seems like yesterday, but it was Mayor Harris, that was like 6 weeks ago now. Just whew, time flies, right? But he brought up this concern around how long processes take and the role of the public and other things. Well, we've been having this internal conversation about whether or not there should be any sort of state mandated time requirement for the review of subdivisions. And this, in a way, gets to the points that you heard from David Johnson and Blanding, and even Mark Christensen, Saratoga Springs, and others, is that all subdivisions are not created equal. And a subdivision of a few units here and a subdivision of 1,000 units there are fundamentally different subdivisions. So then we asked the question, okay, if there's going to be some sort of statutory requirement on timing, should it be based on the scale of a subdivision, the size of a subdivision? Should it be according to different classification of cities. But as we were trying to think it through the housing lens, the question that we came back to was, what if there was a state mandated time requirement for subdivision review for proposals that had a certain threshold of moderate income housing as part of it? So again, not all subdivisions are created equal, but if a developer meets certain criteria, and admittedly that criteria is to be determined, right? So I'm not even going to say a number, because as soon as you say a number, people think that's the number. So X percent, if they come to Clinton City or Harriman City or Layton or Taylorsville, and X percent is planned to be moderate income, should there be a statutory time clock for those types of subdivisions, as opposed to a subdivision that's purely market rate housing or above market rate housing? So this was our way to try to ask this shot clock question, but in a nuanced way around moderate income housing. So as always, it's not a yes, no. It's a very comfortable, somewhat concerned, very concerned, uncertain. So online, please fill in that question. Don't fill in the other ones yet until I explain them. In person, just circle it and make sure you put your name and city, because then we'll be able to track these based on size of city and classification and your community of commonality. And then there's also a spot where you can add comments. So you may say, actually, don't do it this way, but the idea of having subdivisions up to a certain number, maybe that makes sense. But this is your chance to chime in on that, on the shot clock piece. So I'll give everybody a second to do that before I get to question number 2. Todd, anything else you want to explain on that? Okay.
Do you want to close or do you want to put up the PowerPoint?
Yeah, Liam. Oh, Councilmember.
So on this questionnaire, is this referring strictly to administrative process, or what if there's a zone change involved?
Yep. Excellent distinction. This would simply be for the subdivision that's already allowed under the zoning. There you go. Okay, then just like middle school, it's important you turn your homework in, people in the room. So before you leave, make sure you get it to any league staffer. For those online, we'll be able to track it. Okay, the second question related to the subdivisions piece is, if there was a statewide shot clock proposed for subdivisions with a moderate income housing component, what would be the fewest number of business days which would be appropriate for your city? Okay, so this isn't necessarily, what do you think the standard should be statewide, but for your city and where it's at in the growth cycle, what would be appropriate? Zach.
Just clarification, is this for all 3 steps, or just like preliminary and final, or I guess what kind of guidance are you looking for?
I think it's all 3 steps.
Yeah, so it would be all 3 steps, or if you did the 2 steps, because that would be flexible within the process. Gary?
Is this the amount of time that the city actually has possession of the application, or does this include the amount of time to which the developer is taking the application and addressing red lines or questions or issues and deficiencies in the application?
Yeah, excellent distinction as well. So the question for those online is, if there was a statutory shot clock, would that count the entire process, or just the period of time that the city was responsible for the application, not the amount of time where the developer has the application back in their pockets? Yes, right. Our contemplation would be the city time, and that's also part of Carson's data collection. Is we've heard lots of anecdotes from cities, similar to the one, Gary, that you shared a few minutes ago, where the city returns the application back to the property owner. 6 months later, the property owner comes back to the city and complains that the city's been holding them up for 6 months. And you say, actually, we sent the email 6 months ago and your engineers had it. So yes, we would want to make sure that this would just be the city piece. And part of the thought process that we've had to consider is that in the state of Florida, their legislature recently put some really draconian shot clocks on cities. It was a 30-day shot clock to make your final decision in land use. And then on day 31, the city has to refund 10% of development costs back to the property owner. Day 32, 20%, so on and so forth. And so that concept has been law in Florida for just a few months. I've already had legislators talk to me about it this summer. So that's why we thought, well, if we're going to have shot clocks, in the case of Florida, it's just shot clocks on everything. Here, we're saying, okay, well, if the focus truly is on moderate income housing, then let's see if there's a path forward here. And if the answer is there's no path forward, then that's the answer. I mean, we've got plenty of survey results that tell us no to things, but this one was unclear from our previous survey results. Okay, so those are the first two questions related to subdivisions. Before I move to the last poll question, which is a different topic from subdivisions, are there any other final thoughts on either the concept that Todd described or thoughts that the poll questions have brought to mind? Carson, any other thoughts online?
Okay, that's working. There's been a few comments online. I think one relevant one from Mark Christensen is, could there be some kind of very timing based on the number of units in the application, whether it's 100 or 1,000, because those are very different.
Yes, yeah. So that gets to the point I was making about not all subdivisions are created equal. And the league officers, as Mayor Silvestrini mentioned, met with the governor's staff last week and actually talked about that very concept, is rather than having a one-size-fits-all approach in state law, what if you had some flexibility, recognizing that a land use process looks different in Blanding than it does in Saratoga Springs, which is different than Bountiful. And the governor's office thought that made a lot of sense, that you could have different categories depending on where your community was in the growth cycle. And that gets to David Johnson's point as well, that and David, Todd referenced this, but I just want to reemphasize it, that in the board meeting, our board consists of mayors and council members from across the state, and several of our mayors and council members from small communities off the Wasatch Front asked that very question. So we were going back and forth. Do you just say this subdivisions process only applies to cities above a certain size? I think that's still very much on the table, or it applies everywhere, but maybe the shot clocks only apply under certain conditions. So we're still trying to kind of balance that out with our fundamental principles of one size fits all, and coming back to that other piece of, can we improve our process in a way that'll make a difference on the housing side, and will show state leaders that we are trying to proactively be problem solvers and improve our process. Tim, is that you? Okay.
Yeah, just one comment. I know you've thought about this, but if you have the shot clock in place and you're pushing these subdivisions with affordable housing ahead of other subdivisions, if you're a community that has a lot of subdivisions and it delays those subdivisions that you have to leapfrog because of the timing issue, you could cause a lot of disgruntled developers that could lead to next year issues with our processes. So that's just one caution that I would state.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I'm going to respond to it with maybe a slightly different point, and I'm going to try to read faces here to see if this point resonates as well. But if you're a developer and you know that if your project has moderate income housing units, that you would trigger those shot clocks. But if you're a developer that doesn't have those moderate income units, you don't. Has the state now created an incentive for some of those units to actually be set aside as moderate income units? Because that's been one of the frustrations we've heard from cities all year, and frankly for the last 4 years, is we're permitting housing units at a record pace and none of them are affordable. Very few of them are affordable. So would this be a way for developers to say, okay, you know what, in order to qualify for that, I'm going to figure out a way to have some of these units be affordable to then trigger the expedited process. And then from a city perspective, then you can go back to your residents and say, yep, a lot of new housing units, but some of these actually will be affordable. Carson.
We've had a few comments Seth Perrins said, if a project already has the required zone and it complies with all the elements of city code, they call this a straight up subdivision. They move through the process in a matter of weeks, but those are the exception and they're rare. Almost all subdivision requests require zone changes and the developer wants some additional benefits to the master plan and subdivision. When we get this information back, we'll be sure that we were talking about the same thing as the PRC.
Yep. No, that's a great point, Seth. And I want to thank Seth and the other cities in South Utah County, Provo and Orem and Mapleton and Springville. We met with Representative White a couple of weeks ago. Representative White is the co-chair on Commission on Housing Affordability. You all heard from Senator Fillmore at the conference. He's the other co-chair. Representative White is the new co-chair. He's replacing Representative Waldrop. And Representative White came into that meeting and in fact acknowledged our core principles. And he said, I agree with your principles. Here are the other principles I have. And then he listened. Each of those 5 cities articulated what was actually happening on the ground. And he admitted by the end of the call, I didn't know any of that was happening. I didn't know that Provo had this master plan in downtown Provo with all of these high density housing units. Didn't know that in Spanish Fork, for example, that last year they permitted more multifamily housing units than single family housing units for the first time ever. And that there were, if I'm remembering, Seth, you have 4 projects at 20 units to the acre or more, but only one of which has, I'm looking at Carson for some reason, but the camera, you're not Seth, but you get my point. The 4 20 units to the acre or more, but only one has had ground broken on it yet. So anyway, it was very informative for Representative White. So that's where your data really comes in handy in being able to tell your story. It's actually a really good pivot to the last poll question. And this gets to the bigger question around House Bill 462, because really House Bill 462 was our proactive effort last year to say cities we cannot control market forces, we cannot control land costs, we cannot control the labor shortage. What we can control is how we plan for housing. So we build on what we did before with SB 34, and then kudos to 90+% of cities who've submitted their reports thus far, and hopefully our compliance number will be near that number. The PRC last year was actually supportive of 462. They appreciated the efforts there. This year they continue to pound, well, if a city's not compliant, then we should do X, Y, and Z to them, all of which, as of now, our members have said no to. Well, that then led to the question of, should there be additional consequences to not complying with House Bill 462? So for conversation purposes, right now there are 4 cities that have not yet submitted their 462 reports. We're not going to name their names. We know who they are. We've been following up with them. So for now, we'll just refer to them as the 4 cities. Well, what our board endorsed a week and a half ago that we're taking to legislative leadership tomorrow is to repurpose some existing county authorized transportation dollars that right now 100% goes to transit. It's referred to as the fifth, and potentially repurposing some of that money to go to cities, but only cities that are in compliance with 462 on a yearly basis. So it becomes a carrot of new revenue for those cities that are in compliance. So if you're in compliance, you would access it. You're not in compliance, you wouldn't access it, but it would be new money as opposed to creating out of existing revenue penalties that attach to those existing dollars. That's the fifth concept. And we had a lengthy discussion with the board about that and a few others, so I'm not going to spend much time on that now. The other thought that is here in the poll question, oh, you know what, Carson? The third question on the poll question is the appeal authority, and then I was just going to ask the other one. So, shoot, I got ahead of myself. I'll finish where I was at here on the 462 compliance, and I'll come back to the third poll question. The thought here is that these were some of the ideas actually that came to us from Annual, by the way. So thank you for those comments. I'll come back to that. Where did it go? Yeah, there it is. Okay. Yeah, I just skipped past the slide. Okay, so right now in state law, we are under the affirmative duty to substantially review and complete an application and approve or deny each application with reasonable diligence. Reasonable diligence is undefined, so there's no time clock associated with it. Then the second piece of the ripcord is after a reasonable period of time, an applicant may request in writing that the Land Use Authority take final action within 45 days. Reasonable period of time is also undefined. So one of the discussions that we've had has been, what if for cities that are not compliant with 462, that reasonable period of time actually gets defined with a period of time? So it wouldn't apply everywhere, but it would be a consequence to a city that's not in compliance that it forces or it allows an applicant to force the city to take final action within the 45 days. So we don't have a specific amount of time in mind, but that was the thought process there, is say, as a city, you can proactively plan, and in that case, the reasonable period of time is undefined before a developer can pull the ripcord. But if your city that is not compliant with 462, then we define the reasonable period of time. So just file that away. We did not write a poll question about that one. The poll question we did ask was still on subdivisions to a degree. So I'm sorry I missed that when I was going through it. Like I said, I got ahead of myself. Are there any just initial thoughts on that ripcord idea of potentially defining the reasonable period of time for a city that is not in compliance with 462? Does that offend anybody out of the gate? Does it cause concerns? Is it a good idea? Is it something worth considering? Do people want me to stop talking about housing and land use? Or is there anything online? Okay, Gary.
Sorry, at the risk of speaking too much. I don't see a lot of problem with that, because they can always request, our position in Bountiful's been, you can pull the ripcord anytime you want. You may not get a positive recommendation from staff because your application isn't ready. And that's up to them if they choose to do that. So I don't see a lot of harm with letting them or having us determine what a reasonable period of time is.
Yeah.
It does not mean we have to recommend
Right.
the application be approved.
Well, I saw enough heads nodding while Gary was talking in the room, and I don't see any other comments online. So let me wrap up the housing piece of the third poll question. So again, sorry that I was so excited to get to the rest of it that I missed this one. And so put your mind back in the subdivision space, but this is thinking again about the role of the legislative body and how you feel about the concept or principle of clarifying the local legislative body cannot function as the appeal authority in the administrative context, with some exceptions. Right now, we used one example of the small exceptions being the small communities. So this, David Johnson's point earlier about the fact that 80% of our members have 10,000 residents or fewer, that could be one of the exceptions. Gary's point before about sensitive lands, that could be an area where there's some exceptions. But just how do you feel about the concept of the legislative body not functioning as an appeal authority unless there are certain exceptions? So online, finish the survey. Those in person, finish the survey. Let me wrap with this. As you can see, there's lots of moving parts, and we've gotten a lot of really good information from this meeting. You gave us also some great ideas during the conference. The one I'm going to reference specifically is at the bottom here of the process piece, and that's reducing the 12-month period for similar reapplications. That came up by several people during the conference. Even though that's not state law, there may be value in tweaking that requirement, maybe around moderate income housing proposals. Likewise, in the land use space, we've contracted with Will Summercorn on annexation recodification. I talked to him this morning. He's on vacation this week, so that's why he's not here at this meeting. But he's almost done with the technical updates piece for consideration, and then we'll start asking the question around whether there should be any potential policy changes. We're also moving forward with what we've referred to as a gut check panel of league, UAC, and property rights land use experts, where instead of going through the full formal process at the ombudsman's office to get a formal decision, you could essentially have a league person, a property rights person on call, on standby, who, when somebody calls and says, we've got this concern in Vineyard or in Provo or in Murray, you just get a second opinion. It's a quick gut check. It's not binding. There's no formality to it. It would just be that quick gut check. And a lot of this happens anyway, because often cities will call other cities and say, what do you think about this? But then you'd have a city person, a property rights person who can chime in and hopefully help try to resolve disputes before they go further down the path. So if you have an attorney that would be interested in being part of this process, email Carson, because we're collecting names, and then we'll work with UMAA to nominate people for that. Inventory of public assets. You've heard of PIDs. Let me introduce you to DIDs, Developer Infrastructure Districts. This is a new term that came up just a couple of weeks ago that we still haven't seen any formal language on it. We saw basically 3 bullet points on a slide. So we're planting the seed. We'll revisit it. City managers, be prepared. We'll probably talk about this at your conference in a couple of weeks. And then ULUI and Envision Utah both have money from the state to do outreach to community leaders and ordinance review. And we actually see this as a cool opportunity to partner with Envision Utah to not just say, hey, your ordinance is bad, Taylorsville. I only did that because John was taking a picture of the screen. But to say, hey, if you're a city that's interested in doing an ordinance on short-term rentals, here's what you ought to be considering and what policies you should contemplate so that it's actually being helpful to cities. And not just doing some type of report card. And Envision Utah is really open to that concept. And then I spent a couple of hours with the Northern Utah Home Builders. Several city managers were there, and we've got still ongoing dialogue with the Home Builders Association around communication between builders and local governments and expectations and candid feedback. And so we're still pursuing this. We're running this through the city managers. But again, this is where the data set really comes in handy and where we think we can address some of these problems if we improve the administrative processes holistically. Okay. Molly, take it away on homelessness. And then if there's anything else for Justin, me, or league officers, we'll be leaving about 5 minutes to go to editorial board meeting. So Justin, do you want to go first?
I got myself. Do you want to do railroads?
Do I want to do railroads? Is there a slide for it? Or am I just talking about it?
You're just talking about it.
Okay, I guess I'm still here. So if you are a city that has challenges with long trains or safety issues around railroad crossings, there are now 2 bill files open, one of which will be considered in political subs this coming Wednesday. Chatted with Ledge Research on Friday. They're looking for a couple of cities who are interested to come testify about their real world experiences with long trains or with safety challenges around railroads. I know of several ranging from Spanish Fork to Logan and Salt Lake to Delta and like half of Davis County. But if you're interested in this issue, reach out to league staff immediately. Like, let us know today for 2 reasons. 1, because there will be bills and we'll want to have a work group that can provide feedback. And 2, we need to identify 1 or 2 city people who can come to the Capitol Wednesday afternoon to share some experiences with the Political Subdivisions Committee. Okay. With that, thank you, everybody. Go Utes. Molly, take it away. We'll be leaving, but the rest of the staff will still be here so you can follow up. Make sure you turn in your homework assignments. And thank you, everybody, for your feedback today. It's been incredibly helpful. Todd, anything else on housing? Molly, take it away.
Hi, friends. So quick update on the housing landscape. I know that I've had the chance to chat with some of you on this, especially if you are in Salt Lake County. So where we are right now, as just a quick kind of recap of where our shelter cities are in the state. So HB 440 essentially established 3 tiers of shelter cities. The first is our large shelter cities. For that, we have Ogden, Salt Lake, South Salt Lake, Midvale, and St. George. We have our smaller shelter cities, which include Richfield, Cedar City, and Logan. And then we also have our overflow cities. This year, that will be Mill Creek. And then again, a big thank you to Mayor and now Chair Silvestrini for helping us get that, as well as the flexing shelters, which will be in South Salt Lake and Salt Lake City. As we kind of went through this process and have looked at the broader housing and homelessness policy landscape, there are a few issues that are really emerging that we know we need to work on. First and foremost, we know that we need to reconsider how the seasonal overflow within Salt Lake County is working. And we've been meeting with some folks in Salt Lake County as to how that will go. And we're going to continue to work on it. We need to give Representative Elison our proposal by the end of the month. We have some good feedback going on that. But it does kind of dovetail into the next two issues, which is why we wanted to bring this up with the broader LPC. First, or second, I suppose, in that regard, is we had Wayne Niederhauser come and speak at Annual on his efforts to bring more permanent supportive housing online in the state. So as you may recall, that is kind of the marriage of both housing and services to make sure that folks have the shelter they need, but also have the social services they need to be self-sufficient and be successful. And what we've learned so far is that we do need better data from the state on where our existing permanent supportive housing is. And then the third one, and I think what may be of the most interest to this broader group, is that we're learning that we will likely need to revisit the city contributions to the mitigation fund. What we know right now is that our current shelter cities are not whole from the expenses they have from hosting shelters. And we need to figure out what that looks like. There's been some conversation about if that should be counties of a certain class having to contribute more or needing to have a certain level of services available within their jurisdictions. Or, if we potentially increase folks' contributions, but then allow cities with permanent supportive housing to kind of buy down their contribution. So this is still very much in flux. We don't know exactly what the target is right now with OHS and Representative Elison, but we do know that this will likely need to be revisited. And I see hands, so Kate.
Can you clarify, you made a comment about counties of a certain size might need to participate. Mm-hmm. When you said that, did you mean like county governments might participate more?
Great question. We do not know. So to get to where I think you want to go, right, is that a question of, does Davis County need to do more, or do the cities within Davis County collectively need to do more? And I do not know the answer.
Yes, that was my question, along with, obviously most of the services are concentrated in Salt Lake County right now, mm-hmm. but I think there's still a gap between what cities in Salt Lake County are contributing versus feeling like there's still a gap of services that the county government in Salt Lake County is still missing on as well. Mm-hmm. So I guess as you get more information about how our county friends are participating, I'd love to hear more about that.
Absolutely. I think there is a definite need for conversation as to how everyone is kind of showing up to this realm, and whether it's counties contributing more to the mitigation fund or counties committing more to actual services. I think we need to certainly explore that. And one thing we've also discussed as well is that the state needs to, within this mitigation fund, it's been conflated, especially in the last OHS meeting, with operations, and really driving home the point with the state that the state needs to sufficiently fund services and mitigation, and that they can't just kind of play with those funds with one another, to really make sure that they are discrete funds. All right, so my ask to all of you is that we are going to have to revisit this. With the overflow process, that will be largely Salt Lake County driven, but this mitigation fund does affect everyone. Everyone contributes to it. And if you would like to be a part of that discussion or know someone who might be a good fit for that, please let me know, and we will assemble a small working group to explore this. Thank you. Or I guess, John, do you want to come up? We'll do our. Yeah, perfect. Another update we do not have a slide for, because we thought maybe we won't put a novel on a slide and hope you can read it, is that we've been working on some research to continue on the public safety recruitment and retention with the Utah Foundation. We got a lot of really great data last year about what was impacting public safety. recruitment and retention, but we've also learned that the policy landscape has changed pretty dramatically in the last year with media portrayal, kind of political pressure, pay increases, money. And so we're planning on going back out in the field with a survey, 2 surveys, one for the more rank and file officers to kind of assess what their sentiment is, and one with officers to determine, no, we don't have slides. Yeah. And one with officers to kind of understand as well what their perspective is. What else am I missing?
Perfect. Any questions? What she said. Okay. Under other business, Cameron asked me, we just got some recent information. He asked me to cover it just really quickly. I'm on the board of the Utah Communications Authority, and you may or may not know that UCA and L3 Harris Technologies are working on a complete rebuild of all the public safety radio system in the state of Utah. This is 125 radio sites we're building. It's a massive undertaking. All of these sites have required things like solar panels, batteries, towers, shelters, generators, HVAC units. And so it's been a big, big project, and it's ongoing and should be finished. It's a 3-year project. I think it's going to be finished probably toward the end of next year. To that end, that means that we have to have in the state of Utah 30 to 50,000 radios that need to be replaced or reprogrammed. That's a lot of radios. The state recently has appropriated $14.5 million for state and local government to buy new radios. However, there's a couple caveats. One of the differences between the new system and the system we currently have is right now the system we currently have only allows one kind of radio to be used. This new system is will allow almost anybody that makes police radios, that kind of radios, to be able to get on the system as long as it's aligning. And what that means is a lot of you will have the current generation Motorola radios, because that's what everybody uses right now. They can be actually be reprogrammed to be able to work on the P25 system. Right now, the $4.5 million is available to purchase only one kind of radio, and that's L3 Harris radios. There's 2 different kinds that we're calling base radios at UCA. And the funding for this is based on the size of county that your city is in. If you are in a 6th class city, which is less than 4,000 people, you get radios absolutely free. They'll give you radios on up, and it's a sliding scale. 5th class, you have to pay 10%. 4th class, you have to pay 20%. 3rd class, you have to pay 30%. 2nd class, you have to pay 85%. And 1st class counties, which there are only 1, you pay 100% of the radio cost. However, the part of the negotiations that we did with L3 Harris when the original P25 contract was signed requires them to sell radios to us and to our local jurisdictions for about 40% off. And so, for instance, in this case, a $6,000 radio would cost just over $2,000. And so 60% off, I guess it is. And so that's a good deal that's negotiated. But this funding is available. It was kind of one of those strange things that surprised us at UCA when the legislation appropriated this money just recently. And part of the caveat is those radios have to be ordered and we have to put the order in by the end of the year, and for this funding. And are there any questions? John.
Thank you, John. Just for clarification, did this notification go out to our individual police departments, and to whom do they apply? Is there an application process?
Yeah, they just contact the UCA for the application. And yes, it's going out to all of them. Part of the reason I wanted to bring this up is because there's still going to be a tremendous shortfall in costs obviously probably more than half our radios are in first-class counties, right? And first and second-class counties, and they're only paying 0 to 15% of that. And as we look for funding and things like that, I think it's important. Any other questions? Okay. Carson.
Sorry, just one quick question. Are counties eligible for this grant too?
Yeah, the local state, that $14.5 million is for cities and counties. There's another approximately $9 million that's for state agencies for these radios. Any other questions? So I look around. I don't think we have an officer present to close the meeting.
Close this thing up.
Do I have a motion? Can I do this?
Absolutely, your battlefield command.
I'm an immediate past president.
No, he outright. Anything else?
I want you to know this is like my last public meeting, and so I would like to entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved. Bryce Hatterdy seconds it. All in favor? Thank you.